The day I went to a motel with my brother-in-law, and by coincidence, my sister was in the room next door with my husband, but unlike my sister, I wasn't there to do anything wrong. On the day my sister was celebrating her 1-year anniversary with her boyfriend, my brother-in-law approached me asking for help to prepare a romantic surprise. He wanted to propose marriage to her. He told me he wanted something more intimate and special and was thinking of renting a hotel room, decorating it with gifts, balloons, and flowers, and spending the night there with her. He asked if I could help him with the decoration, and I agreed. He said he would try to book the room for the whole day so we would have enough time to prepare everything before the evening. I told my husband about the plan, including the day, time, and place, and he saw no problem with it. In fact, he fully supported me. However, on the agreed day, the hotel called my brother-in-law to inform him that they could not keep the reservation for the entire day, not even with an extra payment. At the last minute, we started looking for another hotel, but since it was a holiday, everything was full. There were no rooms available anywhere. That's when I suggested, why don't you try a motel, a more elegant, well-decorated one? In the end, it's the same thing. He agreed and managed to reserve a room in a nice, well-arranged motel. We agreed to go during the day to decorate it, and in the evening, he would return with my sister for the surprise. But in the rush, I forgot to inform my husband that the location had changed. It would no longer be a hotel but a motel. We arrived and started decorating, him inflating balloons on one side and me on the other, until suddenly, we heard shouting coming from the next room. They were women's screams, but they weren't just any screams. The voice sounded incredibly similar to my sister's. At that moment, I was unsettled but tried to ignore it. I thought, impossible, it can't be. But my brother-in-law also heard it, stopped, and looked at me confused. Wow, that voice sounds a lot like your sister's, he said. And then the woman screamed again. At that moment, I knew, it was my sister. My heart raced, but not for myself, for him. I thought about how devastating this would be for him. He was such a good man. Even so, I stayed silent until he looked at me with tear-filled eyes and said, I'm sure it's her. Seeing his suffering broke my heart, and it was then that, although I desperately wished it was all a misunderstanding, I decided to knock on the door of the room next door. Deep down, I still hoped I was wrong. I knocked hard on the door, heart pounding, hand trembling. With every passing second, the anxiety became almost unbearable. There was no answer. I knocked again, even harder. I could hear movement on the other side, hurried footsteps, muffled voices, the dragging of furniture. They were trying to buy time. My brother-in-law stood beside me, his eyes full of tears and his jaw tight. I could feel his desperation as much as my own. It wasn't just fear of what we were about to find, it was the kind of pain you feel when you begin to understand that your life is about to split into two, the before and after of that door. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doorknob turned. The door opened with a slow creak, as if even the air itself was reluctant to reveal the rot it hid. There she was, my sister, disheveled, her face flushed, wearing only a loose blouse that, from a distance, didn't even seem to be hers. She blinked, irritated by the hallway's brightness, and upon seeing us, her irritation turned into shock. But it lasted only a second. What are you doing here? She asked hoarsely, trying to sound authoritative, as if we were the ones invading her privacy. Before I could say anything, I looked over her shoulder, and what I saw made my stomach churn. There, inside, still adjusting his pants, was my husband. My husband. He froze when our eyes met, like an animal caught in a trap, shame stamped across his face, his hands trembling as he tried to hide what could no longer be hidden. My brother-in-law let out a strangled sound, as if the air had been ripped from his lungs. He took a step back, as if that alone could escape the scene, the reality, the crushing pain that surrounded us. It's not what it looks like, my sister suddenly shouted, raising her hands, her voice sharp and desperate. I just came to talk to him. It's a coincidence. We met here by accident. To talk? Accidentally? Without clothes? In a motel? Her cynicism hit me like a slap in the face. But at that moment, what hurt me the most was not the betrayal itself, it was looking at my brother-in-law, seeing the good man who trusted her blindly, falling apart right in front of me. watching how he still tried, for a second, to believe that absurd lie, as if he desperately wanted everything to have a plausible explanation. But there was none. He shook his head, tears streaming down his face without even trying to stop them. I wanted to hug him, to protect him, but my own legs could barely hold me up. Rage boiled inside me, mixed with a deep sadness, but my pain felt small compared to his. My sister, realizing that her excuses weren't working, changed tactics. She played the victim. She started crying, saying it was his fault, my brother-in-law's fault, that he was cold, distant, that she was needy and vulnerable. My husband said nothing. He just stood there silently, head down, like a coward who didn't even have the decency to face the consequences. I felt like screaming, destroying everything around me, but I remained still, as if trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. I watched my brother-in-law stumble down the hallway, as if each step physically hurt him, and I followed him. Because at that moment, I knew he needed me more than I needed those pathetic explanations. I left my sister crying. I left my husband ashamed. And I swore to myself that this would be the last time they would ever see me lower my head. They had betrayed me, but the wound they had left in him, that one I would never forgive. We walked down the hallway of that motel as if fleeing an explosion. The world seemed to move in slow motion. I could hear my own heart pounding loudly in my ears, my legs weak, my chest crushed. My brother-in-law's face looked like the very portrait of devastation. He wasn't looking at anything, he wasn't speaking, he was just walking in a straight line, like a ghost. When we reached the parking lot, he collapsed. He leaned against the hood of his car and started crying. It wasn't a contained or ashamed cry, it was a cry that took his breath away, that doubled his body with so much pain, sobbing as if his soul was tearing apart from the inside. I had never seen a man cry like that, never. I also wanted to cry. I wanted to scream until I lost my voice. But facing his suffering, I held back, because somehow, his pain hurt me more than the betrayal I myself had suffered. So I approached him slowly, without saying anything. I just stayed there by his side, silent, like someone trying to offer an anchor for someone to cling to in the middle of a storm. It took him time to breathe normally again. When he finally lifted his face, his eyes were red and swollen. He looked at me as if silently asking for help. "Come with me," I whispered. My voice came out broken, trembling, but he understood. I got into my car, and without arguing, he followed me. I couldn't go back home. I couldn't face my husband, my ex-husband. I was already starting to correct it mentally, and pretend everything was normal. I didn't even know where to start. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I only knew that I didn't want to leave him alone. When we arrived at my house, a house that until that morning had seemed so safe, so full of plans and dreams, the emptiness hit me like a hammer. Everything there carried his scent. The photos on the shelves, the coats hanging, the coffee cup in the sink. Everything now felt dirty, corrupted. My brother-in-law entered hesitantly, as if he were invading. I simply locked the door behind us and placed the keys on the first surface I found. There were no more rules. There was no protocol for that situation. It was just the two of us, two castaways trying to cling to any piece of wood in the raging sea. We sat on the sofa, without the courage to look at each other. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I felt the tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had to be strong, for him, for me. It was he who broke the silence first, with a voice hoarse from so much crying. "What are we going to do?" The question hung in the air between us like a sentence. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to find an answer. But the truth was, I didn't know either. "Not yet," I replied softly. "We need to think. We need to understand what happened, process it." He nodded slowly, rubbing his face with his hands. He looked exhausted, destroyed. "I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear her voice." "Not now," he murmured. "Neither do I confessed. Let's keep this just between us for now," I said. "Let's not talk to anyone, at least until we can breathe again." He nodded silently. It wasn't a pact of cowards, it was the last attempt to preserve what little dignity we still had before facing the outside world. But the suffering was unbearable. Every second inside that house was like walking barefoot over broken glass. Every memory hurt me in a new, worse way. It wasn't just my pain that I carried, it was his too. I looked at him sitting there, hands trembling, gaze lost, and something inside me shattered. They had destroyed us. They had laughed at our trust. They had spat on our loyalty. And yet, at that moment, all I wanted was to protect that good man from the cruelty we had just witnessed. Because if the world had already turned its back on us, at least we still had each other. For several days, the house remained submerged in a heavy silence. My brother-in-law practically moved into the guest room. Neither of us had the strength to talk about what had happened. The only silent agreement between us was to somehow survive the pain, each in our own way. But as with every tragedy, the calm would not last long. One suffocating afternoon, while I tried to distract myself by washing dishes I no longer even felt like using, I heard loud knocks at the door. My stomach twisted immediately. Something told me nothing good would come from it. I opened the door, and there they were, my sister and, God, how hard it was to still call him that, my husband, standing hand in hand, as if they were the victims of some great injustice. The cynicism stamped on their faces made me nauseous. "Can we talk?" my sister asked, her voice sweet, but I knew it was pure falsehood. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside and let them in. My brother-in-law, who was in the living room, immediately stood up, tense. They sat down as if they owned the place. My husband, ex-husband, looked at me with an expression of disapproval, as if I had committed some unforgivable crime. Then my sister started speaking. "Look, we know what you tried to do," she said, crossing her arms. "You staged that whole scene to separate us. You manipulated everything." I had to hold back a nervous laugh. It was surreal. It was sickening. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Of course I am," she continued, puffing out her chest as if she were about to present the thesis of the century. "You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted to destroy my happiness. It's no coincidence that you took my boyfriend to a motel, and then made a whole scene." "Enough," my brother-in-law shouted, standing up, red with rage. "It was you who was there betraying. I saw, I heard. How dare you?" She turned to him with a cold, venomous glare. "Oh, sure. Now you're innocent, aren't you? I bet you don't even know exactly what you saw. I bet she poisoned you against me," she sneered, pointing at me. My husband just kept his head down, shrinking, not even having the dignity to deny or admit anything. Cowardly until the very end. Her words began to spread like poison. In less than a day, the whole family knew, but of course, the version they heard was hers. I was accused of having set a trap to separate them, of being jealous, resentful, cruel. "How could you destroy your sister's happiness?" they asked me. My mother called me, crying, saying she was disappointed in me. My father, ever rigid, sent me a cold message saying he didn't want to get involved in my dramas. My uncles, my cousins, all of them, without exception, turned their backs on me. They chose to believe her story. I was humiliated, trampled. I was painted as the villain from a cheap soap opera. Me, the one who had spent my life trying to keep that family together, trying to be good, correct, loyal, now I was the traitor. I felt like screaming to the world that it was all a lie, that I was the victim. I knew they were the traitors. But nobody wanted to listen. Because it was easier to hate me than to face the ugly, dirty truth that my sister and my ex-husband represented. I was left alone. Except for my brother-in-law. He was the only one who stayed. The only one who saw the truth. And at that moment, that was the only thing that kept me from collapsing completely. After days of being treated like the worst person in the world, I had accepted that there was nothing more I could do. People believe what they want to believe. And at that moment, it seemed more convenient for everyone that I was the villain. My brother-in-law, however, did not give up. I could sense the way he watched me in silence, as if carrying inside him a fury that had not yet exploded. It was he who proposed the meeting. I confess I hesitated. I didn't want to humiliate myself any further in front of those people. I didn't want to sit in front of people who pointed at me with fingers full of contempt. But for him, I agreed. Maybe it would be our last attempt to seek justice. That afternoon, everyone was sitting in our mother's house. My parents, my uncles, cousins, even some close family friends. And of course, my sister and my ex-husband, sitting together as if they were the victims of some absurd conspiracy. I sat quietly in a corner, saying nothing. My presence was ignored, like a burden they were forced to endure. My eyes were dry, I had no more tears left to offer. It was then that my brother-in-law stood up, no beating around the bush, no hesitation. I brought evidence, he said, and the room plunged into tense silence. He placed his phone on the table, connected it to the television, and began to show everything. The photos, the messages, the motel reservations, the exchanges between my sister and my husband, arranging meetings, exchanging disgusting declarations of love and desire, all while they destroyed us behind our backs. With every new image that appeared on the screen, I watched the faces in the room change. First disbelief, then shock, and finally shame. My mother covered her mouth, unable to hide her horror. My father, always so rigid, blushed with rage and lowered his head. My brother-in-law didn't stop. He continued reading word by word, exposing without mercy the filth they had tried to hide. My sister tried to defend herself. She tried to scream, cause a scene, claim it was all fabricated, that everything had been manipulated. But the amount of evidence was so overwhelming that even she could not keep the lie alive. My ex-husband remained silent, shriveled up on the sofa, the pathetic coward he had always been. When the presentation ended, silence filled the room. All the gazes turned to me, but this time, filled with shame and regret. It was my chance to speak, to stand up, to scream at them, to throw in their faces how much they had hurt me without even listening. But I said nothing. I got up slowly, picked up my purse, and looked at each one of them, one by one. Now you know, I murmured. And honestly, it doesn't make any difference anymore. I saw tears streaming down some faces. I saw desperate attempts to approach me, to apologize, to mend what was beyond repair. But I was tired. Tired of begging for love, understanding, respect. Without looking back, I walked out the door. I left behind my family. I left behind the traitors. I left behind the pain. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something new inside me. Freedom. They lost me. And I finally found myself. The months that followed were hard, very hard. At first, everything felt like a void. I would wake up and wonder who I was, what was left of me after everything had been stolen. My marriage, my family, my reputation. But little by little, the pain began to transform into something else. Something stronger. Something that made me get out of bed every day, even when I still felt like disappearing from the world. My brother-in-law, or rather, my friend, because that's what he had become, stayed by my side all the time. Not as a shadow of pain, but as living proof that it was possible to survive what they had done to us. We saw each other almost every day. At first, it was strange, silent, like two soldiers who had survived the same battlefield trying to figure out how to move forward. But over time, we built a friendship I never imagined could exist. It was a relationship based on the deepest respect, on shared suffering, on the silent understanding of those who know, without needing to say it, what the other carries inside. There was no romance. There were no stolen kisses or empty promises. It was something much more beautiful than that, it was real. We took small trips. We started new hobbies. Today, we are renovating parts of the house. We laugh, we cry, we have learned to live again. And each step, each new breath, is a small victory. Meanwhile, my sister and my ex-husband, they sank. Rejected by the family, isolated from friends, seen as the shame of everyone who ever knew them. It didn't take long before they started trying to approach us again. Messages, calls, dramatic letters, requests for forgiveness dressed in pathetic justifications. Attempts to rewrite the story as if they were victims of their own error. My friend, because that's truly what he is now, and I received the first attempts at contact with a mix of disbelief and contempt. But it was one Sunday afternoon when the final scene occurred. They appeared personally, standing at my door, thin, worn out, with pleading looks. "We know we made mistakes," my sister said, her voice trembling. "But we're family." I looked at both of them, feeling nothing but cold contempt. "Family?" I repeated, letting out a dry laugh. "You lost that right the moment you decided to stab the ones who trusted you most. Now you can go back to whatever hole you crawled out from." My friend at my side crossed his arms and said firmly, "You are not welcome here. Not ever." I closed the door in their faces. Without shouting, without crying, without trembling, I simply closed it. And when I heard the click of the lock, it was as if I had also closed a painful chapter of my life. I looked at him. He looked at me. And we smiled. It was the smile of two people who knew they had lost much, but at the same time, had gained something priceless. Freedom. Life. The freedom to stop carrying those who do not deserve our love. The freedom to rebuild life without bowing to those who hurt us. The freedom to be happy without fear, without guilt. Today I know it. Sometimes, the worst betrayals do not destroy us, they set us free. Time passed. And when I say that, it's not just the calendar flipping pages. It's as if the internal scars were also, little by little, closing. They still hurt sometimes, on cloudy days of the soul. But overall, life was beginning to have color again. My friend, because now, he was definitely the best friend I could have, blossomed before my eyes. It was beautiful to see. From a broken man, he became someone stronger, lighter. And, of course, eventually, he met someone. I still remember the day he showed up at my house, all nervous, fiddling with his car keys as if he were 15 again. "I want to introduce you to someone," he said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. I laughed, crossing my arms. "Oh, I see," I teased, amused. "You're in love, huh?" He turned as red as a ripe tomato, which only made me laugh even more. "It's not that, I mean, it's serious. I want you to meet her. I want to know what you think," he said. And suddenly, I felt an enormous responsibility. He trusted me so much that he needed my approval, my opinion. It was beautiful. It was rare. We agreed to go out to dinner, a simple place, no fancy frills, the way we always liked it. When she arrived, I understood everything. She was sweet, genuine, the kind of person who doesn't need to say much to convey peace. We talked for hours. I laughed, I had fun, and in the end, I gave my verdict with the most serious air I could muster. "Well, I approve. But only because she didn't run away after seeing your weird laugh." He laughed so loudly that the whole restaurant turned to look at our table. I laughed along with him. He was happy, and that was all that mattered to me. As for me, I took a different path. After everything I had lived through, I realized that I didn't want, nor did I need, a relationship to feel complete. My focus shifted to work. I threw myself into projects, new courses, new challenges. I rediscovered myself, capable, strong, full of ambitions that I used to think I had to postpone to fit into the mold of the perfect wife. No, now, I was my own priority. I became my own best company. Sometimes, on Friday nights, my friend and I would still meet to chat, to remember our falls, and mainly to celebrate how we had managed to rise again. Him with a new love, me with a new life. And every time we said goodbye, I returned home with the absolute certainty that some losses, no matter how painful, lead us exactly where we are supposed to be. Because sometimes, to find true happiness, we first need to lose everything that kept us small. Life has its own ways of showing us that everything happens at the right time. I was fine, truly fine. Not that forced happiness you fake for the world. But a silent peace that I carried within me, even on the busiest days. It was on a sunny afternoon, while I was organizing papers in the office, that he showed up. With that goofy smile I knew so well. He walked in without even knocking, as he always did, and threw himself onto the couch, nervous and radiant at the same time. "I have something to tell you," he announced. "If it's to say you finally learned how to cook, I'll warn you right now, I don't believe you, I replied, laughing. He rolled his eyes but kept smiling. I'm going to be a father, he said. For a second, the world stopped. I felt my eyes fill with tears, but this time, tears of genuine happiness. He, whom I once thought had lost everything, was now beginning a new story. I jumped up and hugged him so tightly that he laughed and complained. Congratulations, my dear friend, I whispered. And there's more, he said, slowly pulling away, his eyes shining with emotion. I wanted you to be the godmother. My heart raced. I didn't think twice. Of course I accept, I replied, laughing and already imagining myself crying at the baptism. Everything was in place. Everything had finally found its place, everything except her. When my sister found out, of course, it was a scandal. She sent furious, indignant messages, as if the world owed her something. It's absurd that I'm not invited, she screamed in one of her voice messages, so hysterical she sounded like a child throwing a tantrum. I simply laughed. I answered calmly, coldly, with certainty. The place for snakes is in the bushes, and you are exactly where you belong. I didn't respond to anything else after that. I blocked her, deleted her, and moved on. While I was building a life full of love, respect, and truth. She kept sinking deeper and deeper into failed relationships, repeating the same pattern of betrayal, lies, and self-sabotage that she herself chose. It was sad, but it was her choice. And I had already learned that I could not, and did not want to, save someone who didn't want to be saved. My friend, now about to become a father, was flourishing. The family of his new wife welcomed him with open arms, with respect, affection. Everything he always deserved but never had in our former family. As for me, I remained happy. I didn't need labels, wedding rings, or eternal promises of love. My happiness was real because it came from within me. And in that new life we built. Him with his family, me with my dreams and achievements. We understood that sometimes the greatest victory is simply being happy. While others drown in their own choices. Without hatred. Without resentment. Simply free.